Just be another moment. And could we all press record? And over to you, Kimberly.
All right, thank you. Welcome, everyone. I did not know a week ago when I had to come up with what I was going to speak about today that I would, or we would all be seeing Miss Greta on the cover of Time magazine as Person of the Year. So I just want to give a shout out to this little woman and everything that she is doing for all of us, no matter what age or country we live in. She has just taken this climate change thing by the storm. I'm getting emotional thinking and talking about her. So I looked up her chart for us. I decided, well, let's look at this and include that. We don't have an exact time for Greta. We know that she was born January 3rd, 2003 in Stockholm, Sweden. And she was born the day after Mercury went retrograde at 28.5 Capricorn, as you can see on your screen. And we know that she was born right after a new moon. So I just wanted to put up, when I don't know a time, I use 0-degree Aries equal houses. So I'm not messing around with signs and houses. I just look at the basic archetypes and aspects through signs. And so this is what you're seeing on your screen with the 0-degree Aries rising. However, as many of us are aware, we had the full moon of Gemini this morning. And so here is this young woman receiving this Person of the Year alkaloid and on this full moon. You can see that Jupiter has been going back and forth over her natal Pluto, Sag, 3 times. I suspect that she may be born early afternoon. I'm wondering if transiting Pluto hasn't been going over this moon at 21, what's 22 degrees, as Pluto's been traveling 3 times this year. I would suspect so. So, again, I just appreciate the vision and the leader she is for all of us right now on planet Earth. I'm getting very emotional. I wasn't emotional prepping for all this. So thank you for allowing me to share my emotions with you with how she's inspiring us. So as I thought of this subject, I had been aware that there was a chart for the discovery of the first basic oil well in Pennsylvania here in the United States back in 1859. And I just started pondering and I thought, oh yeah, we've got the fossil fuel 3, coal, gas, and oil. This is the main 3 fossil fuels that are really driving, the global warming and changing of our climate on planet Earth. And so all 3 of these fossil fuels have been on the Earth's surface for throughout time. And there are stories of how Native Americans here in North America would use the naturally burning gas that would come up to the ground. They would use it in various ways for their survival with food, clothing, and shelter. Anyway, we can pretty much see on this chart, sample chart that I have in your lower right screen, from 1880 to 2020, just how drastically we have been raising temperatures. Yes, we have had temperatures changing on Earth as long as we have had an Earth. But it is pretty much proven, and my recording says it stopped. Okay.
No, it's okay. You can continue.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. Okay. But we pretty much have proven fact now that we humans are really affecting the climate with this consumption of all our fossil fuels. So what I did is I went researching for charts. And of course, coal was really, it really came into mass consumption and use when James Watt basically upgraded the steam engine. The early steam engines came about in the early 1700s. But in 1776, the month of March, could not find a date. Nobody knows the date. March 1776 was when they put 3 of his steam engines actually into commercial use. I probably don't have to tell anybody here who is watching today. Pluto at 28 degrees Capricorn. Coal is going to have its Pluto return just like the United States. As a matter of fact, transiting Pluto will make 5 conjunctions to this natal Pluto of the steam engine here in 2022 and 23. That will then be joined with Neptune as it finishes up its cycle in Pisces, going over Mars, maybe Sun, maybe. We don't have exact dates. When, if we're dealing with a chart for a month long, basically you want to look at Jupiter being within a degree or 2 or maybe 3 or 4 of what you see on the screen. Saturn, degree or 2. Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, they're going to be pretty stable within minutes throughout this month of March. And so we can look to some of those aspects to the outer planets and start to gain information. So Neptune will then have an opposition to itself natally. Now, as we'll look over this next hour, there's been debate in the astrological community, for instance, whether oil is ruled by Neptune or Pluto. Astrologers go back and forth within the two of them. I think those 2 planets can co-rule, quite frankly. But if you look at the fact that Pluto is going to go over Pluto 5 times, I think this is when we're going to really start to see an increase in the demise of the use of coal planet-wide. So we've been using coal for 250 years, and you've probably seen the pictures of the dirty air in London, England in the 1800s, and parts of China and developing countries even today. The question is going to become, what will the global political will be to phase out coal? Now, coal has been in a decline because of the increase in gas. Gas has become the cheapest of the 3 fossil fuels for human consumption. And so it's having a play with it too. However, as we look at this Pluto-Pluto conjunction, the Neptune opposition, cross our fingers that this will actually give us the recognition of what the burning of coal is doing on planet Earth. Lots of subjects, lots of tangents we could go in right now, but for sake of time, I'm just going to kind of narrow my discussion. I did put up a few aspects for you if you want to just have these to look at later on, the exact dates when Neptune and Pluto will make their transits to these natal planets that we're looking at. But I want to move on and show you the chart for the first gas well. In popular lore, it's known as 1821 in Fredonia, New York. It was actually in late spring, early summer of 1825 that it actually came about. And this is the closest we have to a date. There's debate of whether or not the June 4th date is accurate. There's debate that perhaps it might have been in August as well. So I went with that June 4th date and thought, here's that Capricorn again. And Pluto's been going over, probably when Pluto went over Neptune here in about 5-6 years ago or whenever that was. that's really when this natural gas took off and um, exploded in our consumption of it. And then, and again, interacted with the decline of coal. But we've also had Pluto then going over Uranus here over, I think that was 2018, 17, 18, right in there. Can you remember, for those of you who live in the United States, there's a lot of fracking for gas in the state of Oklahoma. And all of a sudden, they started having a phenomenal increase in earthquakes because this fracking for oil and gas is very water intensive, liquid intensive with all the chemicals that they use. And what do? They pump all that stuff back into the ground and they play around with the layers of earth, Capricorn here, and the state of Oklahoma finally, very conservative state, they finally stopped allowing the companies to put all of the waste liquids back into the earth, and the earthquakes declined again. So I think that transiting Pluto timing over this natal Uranus at 19 degrees Capricorn is right within the timing of when all that happened. And so again, we're not going to take the time to go through all of these charts in detail. The other thing that I will point out here, two things. Well, being, that if we use this June 4th date, Capricorn, is Moon going to be late Capricorn or is it going to be early Aquarius? Stay tuned to see what happens in the news with gas coming up the beginning of this next decade. That could help us do some timing there to see if maybe this June 4th date is accurate. But the second thing I wanted to point out is that when Neptune goes into Aries and goes over Pluto in early Aries, whether the chart is June or August, that is going to be another time period. This will be probably about 2027, 28, when Neptune is in those first 5 degrees of Aries. We can see more of this natural gas in the news. Do we have an earth event, some type of, natural gas explosion, of which we've already been seeing, the one that happened in California a couple years ago? Does something like that happen? Do we have a wake-up call where it is a turning point in the soul and life of using natural gas? Stay tuned. We'll be observing and watching as time goes by. Here are some dates when Uranus goes over. No, that wasn't the screen I wanted. Never mind this screen. Again, Mercury, Venus, while we've got that June 4th date, you can observe them if you want to and see if we have some activities with those. Again, I'm not always real fussy with those inner planets if I'm not always exact on a date. Now, when we drilled the first oil well, again, this date is quite well known, August 28th, 1859, in Titusville, Pennsylvania. No Capricorn planets, but we've had Jupiter in Cancer, and we've got Neptune in Pisces here. So we're going to be having a Neptune return pretty soon. Whew. How many of you caught the news in the last few days that Saudi Arabia's oil company Aramco did an IPO, that's initial public offering, onto their stock market? They put 10% of the company up to public purchase and had buku sales with just, again, 10% of their company. And Aramco is now the largest company in the world. They outpaced Apple with the IPO offering that they did within this last week. I read that in the news and I went, oh, really? You know, if you, I'm probably not going to remember the facts exactly, but within the last decade, the oil investments by companies worldwide is absolutely staggering. Billions and billions and billions of dollars. It's almost like the oil companies see the writing on the wall and they're going to try Pluto and Capricorn to dig in to the earth just as much as they can. It's going to take a lot of political will to have a divestment of these oil companies. Um, by the way, if you're not familiar with her book, it is 5, 6 years old now. Naomi Klein, K-L, I think it's I-E-N or K-L-E-I-N, Naomi Klein. She wrote a book titled This Changes Everything. And it's basically the history of fossil fuel usage for the last 250 years since, of course, the steam engine. And it's an excellent book. It's not the easiest book to read. It's very factual. I've been slowly reading this book over the last 3, 4 months, and because it's 5, 6 years old, it's been a very nice review of how we've kind of stalled out with climate change. Yay, Greta, go, up until maybe this last year. And I do recommend that book for you to read, just to get your backdrop and your history and some facts in regards to that. And the best warriors on planet Earth in really leading the climate change movement have been all your indigenous communities, no matter what continent you look at. And so, from the perspective of Neptune in Pisces, they've really been leading spiritual activism. They've been leading the conversation that all species are interrelated. Many of us in the evolutionary astrology community are, quite recognizing of this, but it's the indigenous peoples that have been coming back to the forefront and leading the way. And they're the ones who've had so much of their lands taken away. But with the treaties, so many of them actually have outright ownership of the land. Much stronger in Canada recognizing that than, say, here in the United States. For those of you who don't know it, I live in the northern plains of the United States. I live in western South Dakota. I live in Sioux Indian territory. So I, was raised with probably a lot more awareness of Native Americanism in the United States than perhaps average person. So while they have lost the most, they are really the leaders taking off. One of the things that we may see happen with transiting Neptune, going over the natal Neptune with oil, opposing the natal Neptune in gas, is the rise of what we can just basically call spiritual activism. How do you want to be a part of it in your community, wherever you're at? I mean, week after week after week goes by, and there's another new study and another new report, and everything they predicted with climate change over the last 20 years and all kinds of studies is happening, and now it's increasing even more. The polar extremes are melting faster than we thought. So I just raised these 3 charts for you to just give some possibilities, examples, ideas. You can play with these charts yourself and see how these things happen. In Jeffrey Wolf Green's teachings, there's what's known as 2 basic types of evolution. what we would call uniform evolution, which is day by day, week by week, month by month, year by year, how all of us just naturally evolve and age on planet Earth. There's also what we call cataclysmic evolution, where the desire to resist and maintain status quo runs up against the evolutionary forces, and sooner or later things bust open and evolution takes place. Jeffrey would always say that in consensus consciousness, those approximately 10 out of 7 out of 10 souls on planet Earth, in consensus consciousness, that desire to be secure is constantly there. And many times the consensus world only makes the necessary changes when it's a cataclysmic force. Stay tuned. How much more will we see of this on planet Earth before that political will becomes the majority to change things? I also just wanted to briefly touch upon the 4 elements, and then I'll bring in the transits of the outer 3 planets for us, and hopefully perhaps have some time for discussion and Q&A. Many of us, when we start to study astrology, recognize that we can take the 12 archetypes and divide them by the 4 elements: fire, earth, air, water. And fire is spiritual, earth is physical, air is mental, water is emotional. And it tends to create a temperament when a planet is in those signs and houses known by their 4 elements. So we can observe those outer planets when they move through a sign in the sky, and they'll do these long transits: Uranus 7 years, Pluto 12 to 30 years, Neptune approximately 14, 15 years through signs. When they go through those various signs, we can relate it to that element of that sign, and we can see Earth events in those ways. Of course, as you see on your screen, common example is Neptune transiting its own sign, Pisces, which is water. Neptune having rulership of the oceans and all of the melting glaciers and rising sea levels that we're all starting to become more and more aware of. Another very broad example, or acute example, I would say, is when Uranus went into Aries, and we had the earthquake in Japan and had the Fukushima nuclear power plant meltdown. Was to the day that Uranus went into Aries. I just don't remember whether it was the first time or the third time after its retrograde. So this is something that all of us can observe. However, I want to point out that climate change is happening worldwide, and it is happening in every level, whether it is the earth, the water, the air, fires in California or Australia, anybody. And it's almost like if our human resistance to divest from fossil fuels is not adapted, it can get to the point where it doesn't matter what the outer planet signs are by element, because every element is just being activated all over the place. We'll still be able to observe things, but we humans interfering are throwing a lot of chaos into natural law. Now, in case any of you are new to astrology and watching this, I wanted to give you a graph to show you the 3 signs of fire, earth, air, water, and then also a circular example of how we can look at those 4 elements as well. We're not taking the time to go through this. There's a lot you can find on the internet for that. I just wanted to give a brief example and sharing of this, okay? Uranus in Taurus. I think, as I've been observing it, almost halfway through the cycle, it's like one long, slow disruption of climate events in every corner of planet Earth. It's just like day after day after day, Uranus slowly, just having an event, and another event, and another event. And yet at the same time, with Uranus in the picture, the physical surface of the Earth, Uranus is actually that dirt, Taurus. Taurus is actually that dirt, that physical surface of the Earth. And it is changing. I live in, my heritage in this lifetime, my conditionings, is growing up in a farming community. My joke, for those of you who don't know this, I spent the first 26 years of my life on a tractor. I was the oldest of 3 girls, so I was dad's hired hand. And I did chores twice a day, 7 days a week. I have a good Pluto Virgo work ethic. So I lived off of that earth very closely for a long period of time. And what we have done to the depletion of our souls is ridiculous. This is the type of thing that we're seeing all over the planet with Uranus and Taurus, no matter whereabouts you live. You can take any community you're in, and the physical surface of the earth is changing. Whether it's being burned up, whether it's being drowned, whether we're messing around with chemicals into all of the natural homeostasis that's going on. And so what can be happening through Uranus and Taurus and climate change is that there is becoming less and less ground worldwide that can actually produce the food we need to eat. Whether we're burning down the rainforest to raise cattle that takes something like, 30 gallons of water to produce a pound of protein, or I don't quote me on that fact. It's something ridiculous like that. Might be more than that. Might be like 50 or 250 gallons of water to produce a pound of animal protein. We are facing some real, Uranian crises by how we are destroying the surface of the earth and not having the ability to feed all of us when we have the means to do so. We are also seeing all kinds of morbidity and extinction issues, not only with the animal species, the fauna, but also the flora, with the plants. I am in the United States, every state has a land grant college. And one of the mandates on a federal level for those land grant colleges is that they must educate the people to gardening in their local area. So I've been a master gardener volunteer in my state for a decade now. And boy, you want to talk about somebody who's on the leading edge of really trying to work with people and help the general public understand what we're doing with the changing of the seasons and various plants, starting to go into bloom earlier than the insects and the birds, and all that natural simpatico of getting along with each other is being completely messed up. Think of the trauma, Uranus, with the various flora and fauna when the rhythms are all messed up and nothing works in that Taurian natural, seasonal rhythm anymore. I also think we're noticing, I called it the Taurus crawl. We're hearing storms are becoming stronger, slower, longer. Yeah, and the slower is that, Taurian part that just we don't have. I live in tornado territory. I've actually been through 2 tornadoes, the basement of the house. Watched one come through our farm and destroy things when I was about 8-10 years old. I have a very strong fear of tornadoes. And so, now we have super tornadoes. We have 3 tornadoes come together and, last for 2 minutes instead of 10 seconds. This is the Uranus and Taurus effect of everything. Uranus in Gemini, you see the dates on your screen. I think we're going to see increases in wind events. Now, I now live in the mountains, but I grew up in the prairies, in the cornfields, and the wind never stopped. One of the best places for solar wind is up here in the northern plains. And boy, we notice the increasing of the wind where we live. We're not done. It's going to become stronger yet. If you watch your local news stations and you see the meteorologists saying, well, the wind gusts at the local airport were 70 miles an hour today. I've literally been blown over by the wind before. And so the vehicles that get blown over, to the point that it won't be safe to go outside, to the point that you won't be able to have, perhaps it'll be one of the ways that we stop all the semis on the road and we go back to hauling things by train more efficiently. And we'll also, when Uranus goes into Gemini, then there'll be drying effects in certain parts of the world. The drier place is getting drier, the wetter place is getting wetter. It's now official in the small little community where I live. Since we've been keeping records in the late 1800s, we've now had the wettest year we've ever had. In the state of South Dakota, since we've been keeping records in the last 2 years, we've now had the wettest 2 years since we've been keeping records in the early 1800s. And then, of course, Uranus in Cancer, we'll see where this leads. We'll see how active the political will is when we get into the 2030s. But Uranus in Cancer may bring a big spike in the increase of sea levels, or the magnitude of hurricanes, or how much rain we get. Neptune in Pisces, and I'll talk about that next. Neptune in Pisces has been just, starting to see that slow, gradual, Neptune doesn't have the sparks of Uranus and Pluto. It's just slowly making some effect. Uranus isn't going to be that way when it goes into Cancer. And I think both of these two, not to mention, this Pluto and Capricorn transit we're going through, but Uranus in Gemini is going to affect the migrations of people who have nowhere to live, their cities underwater. Uranus in Cancer can perhaps be like Pluto in Capricorn, where we got to keep those people out. What is it? The majority of people, and I read things, I'm a readaholic, and I don't always have time to research what I read where with statistics, but the majority of people live on the coast. What are we going to do when those are in the word, when they're covered up by water? Neptune in Pisces. Neptune does have rulership of the oceans. So we know this stuff: melting glaciers, rising sea levels, the acidification of the oceans, cities literally drowning. And so today, 29% of the fish species have already declined by 90%. Recent CBS News article that the fish could be gone. Disappear. Neptune word. They could disappear from the oceans by 2048 if we do not start making drastic changes. For those of you who have Netflix, and if you don't, I would recommend getting it for this series alone, or going out and buying the DVDs if you want. But there is a beautiful Netflix series called Our Planet, and Leroy and I are watching it with my 10-year-old niece, and we're about halfway through it. And the areas of the world, coral reefs should be on this slide, the areas of the world where they are creating like sanctuaries in the oceans, the fish come back and all the diversity comes back. And it comes back in a short time period, like 10, 15 years. And so it's not fated yet, but we're real close. And, you know, Neptune in Pisces, what can be the problem here is us humans just tuning out climate change, tuning out, being in denial, like some political leaders, about what's actually happening. So this Netflix series, first of all, it's absolutely beautiful. It can be quite devastating sometimes when you realize what we're doing, but there's also hope. And if I'm correct, I think there is a second series coming out. It's a BBC documentary series because it's been so highly acclaimed. And I've got to give a little shout out. Thank you for letting me be personal. My 10-year-old niece, who's, you know, moved to my city here a few months ago. So now I have her, you know, lots of times. We were sitting there watching that series and she's going, "And Kimmy, that's a blah blah, and that's a blah blah, and that's a blah blah." And she was naming the fish and the animals. And I'm going, "How do you know that?" "Well, because I know it. We study this." And she, at 10 years old, is watching every episode from start to finish. And then she's going out there and telling everybody about it. And so there's hope with the kids. There's hope with the kids. Neptune in Aries, again, what I would like to see, what I will, you know, intend and initiate is the spiritual activism. I mean, many of us in EA know Neptune in Pisces is literally recognizing the interconnectedness of all species, and there is not one better than the other, the religious dogmas. We can recognize it, but what are we going to do about it? The young ones, yes, they're being active, but I think by the time Neptune gets into Aries, it's going to force all age groups to start to be active because these climate events are not going to change. And when Neptune goes into Aries, it's going to dry out Neptune, and we will see increases in fire worldwide in ways that we think it's never burned there before, or how does that burn? We will see fires started in cities that don't, you know, take care of recycling their garbage, and no one can put the fire out. Have any of you ever seen a pile of rubber tires lighted? They don't quit burning. And there was somebody in the news recently, one property owner sued another property owner because the first property owner had tree stumps and he wanted to get rid of them. So he started them on fire. Well, guess what? The fire burned down into the ground through the roots and came out on trees in the second person's property, and he lost his trees. So again, Neptune in Aries will create fire in ways that it'll get our attention one way or another. Pluto in Capricorn, you know, the biggest thing that I think we're observing is the fact that we're having to face the reality of climate change. Political leaders in various areas of the world can be in denial all they want. The insurance companies are not in denial. The militaries are not in denial. You're seeing lots of areas where it's like, oh gosh, this is real. How are we going to protect our wealth or our piece of the planet? And I think it's also really showing in various ways. Again, I mean, this was a lot in the collective consciousness back in the 70s, I think it was. when, 35 million children died of starvation a year. We've got that down to about 5 million kids dying of starvation a year, and that's still ridiculous. So we've got all kinds of disruptions here again. Capricorn is earth element. And so it deals a lot with the accumulation of resources on planet Earth, not just collecting money or bitcoins, but, here again, food starts to come into the picture, just like with Uranus in Taurus. And what we have going on with mutating genes, etc., is unintended consequences. Being a master gardener, we get, updates from our state university on a weekly basis. And, the Japanese this or the Asian that pest that has never been here in our area, but when it shows up, it literally destroys a native pest that takes care of keeps things in balance. We're messing around with this stuff. So again, bleeds into Uranus and Taurus as much as Pluto and Capricorn, but Pluto and Capricorn is the reality of the consequences of what's going on, not to mention the various Earth events that come along and create billions upon billions of dollars worth of damage. And how are we going to pay for it? Are we going to allow people to rebuild their second home on a coastline when you and I, as U.S. taxpayers, are paying for it through the, FEMA bailouts? These types of things is what we're seeing. We're also having a monopolizing of our food. Being from the Northern Plains, I'm quite aware that there are patents on corn and soybeans and, basic grains that we grow. Farmers can't cultivate their own seeds anymore here in the United States. They get sued by Monsanto and Bayer, the big corporations, etc. And of course, if they monopolize the food, they get to control who gets to eat what. And so we're already in the midst of creating malnutrition of the future, where we're overweight, but we're undernourished. Now, don't want to be all doom and gloom here, but it is Pluto and Capricorn. Here's reality, folks. Here's a place that I really admire, the landinstitute.org in Kansas, the state of Kansas, south of me. They are working to create perennial grains, okay? So they're taking an annual grain and in natural ways. They are learning to make it perennial. Annual means it comes up one season, produces the flower, the seed, and dies. Perennial means pre-annual. It means that the roots live underground throughout the cold period, and the plant comes back again. And so they've literally created a perennial grain called Kerzna, Kerzna. And there actually is a restaurant in, I think it's either Minneapolis or St. Paul. There's a restaurant and its whole focus is on Kerzna. And instead of using wheat, they use, and Kerzna is perennial wheat. Okay, so I should clarify, instead of using annual wheat, they're using a perennial wheat. And so they're working with the grains to, and so what happens when we leave them in the soil, of course, we don't plow it up, we don't cultivate it, we don't till it. The soil is the living organism. Talk about Uranus and Taurus again. The soil's alive, and we used to till, and that's what I helped my dad do. I was the cultivator when the crops were planted to keep the weeds out. And now it's just the opposite. There's a lot of farmers who have turned to no-till farming. You want to keep that soil alive as possible, and as master gardeners, We are constantly educating people. Do not till your vegetable garden. You leave it. And if you want, you plant a little annual in the fall that you will, where I live, the freezing temperatures will kill it off. And as that decomposes back into the ground, then you are replenishing the natural nitrogen in the ground. So you can go to the landinstitute.org and learn more if it is of interest to you to recognize this type of thing. All right, this is just a brief little snapshot in an hour. Where's my time? I'm trying to keep there's my last slide. I'll be participating with EA Zoom next week on their annual 2020 forecast. And so I don't know if Linda or Daniel's there to help me with slides. I'm going to go back. Do I have questions or comments from anybody? I'm going to go back to some of these slides with the fossil fuels, whether it's the coal or oil, gas. Comments or questions? I have no problem talking.
I was just wondering about the north node of Pluto in Cancer.
Good one.
Yes, and I feel that consciousness itself is wanting to evolve through the Cancer archetype, which to me indicates focus on our home, which is Mother Earth.
Totally.
They've mucked it up through Capricom, right?
Oh, totally. Good comment, because again, coal, Pluto, and Capricorn, we know that regardless of the exact date. Gas, Uranus in Capricorn, so, and Neptune in Capricorn. And so with at least 2 out of the 3, and then I think it was with oil, we had Jupiter in Cancer. So I guess you can say all 3 of them. There are some of those outer planets in that Capricorn Cancer, and you are so correct with the whole understanding of the south nodes of Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto being in Capricorn, that many of us souls were a part of we were incarnated on Earth when we had those transitions from matriarchal principles to patriarchal principles. In other words, when we transitioned from giving, sharing, and including over to taking, hoarding, and excluding. And so this is also part of this whole picture with the whole, all 3 fossil fuels that, not only are we messing up the planet, but it's really bringing to consciousness in many ways, Capricorn, that individuated consciousness is bringing into consciousness just how much we're destroying our own nest. Will it be a part of helping us shift from patriarchal distortions to more natural laws and principles? Quite frankly, I don't think we have any choice. I think it's one of those cataclysmic things, even if it's a, big 100-year-long cataclysm. We have no choice. We can't keep burning these fossil fuels like we are. There won't be anything to survive on, or it will be a pretty ugly existence if we don't change things. Good comment. And then, of course, when Uranus then transits into Cancer and goes over the north nodes of those 3 planets, can it be a part of, the wake-up call to nurturing all of us, regardless of which species we are? Yeah, excellent comment. Anyone else? Comments or questions?
I think that's about it, Kim Maria. You covered just about everything. Fantastic presentation. Thank you for being so thorough.
Mm-hmm. You are
Okay,
most welcome.
any final thoughts?
Thank you, everyone. Pleasure to meet up with everybody, and I'll see some of you in another half hour?
Yes, we'll be back with Erin Sullivan, so we'll catch you for that. And thank you so much, and we'll catch you next time as well.
All right. Thank you again, everyone.
Thanks, Kim Marie. Bye.
Mm-hmm.